And welcome to my protest. This is Donald Jeffries coming to you from just outside the swamp-infested Washington, D.C. So we do every Friday at this time. We have a nice group discussion today. John Potash has been on this show before. Admire his work. He's best known for Drugs as Weapons Against Us, which is the book, and then the film based upon that, which you really should watch. Great stuff. So we'll touch upon that. But I want to talk about Venezuela and all the other madness that's been going on. And then we have the lovely ladies from Knights of the Storm. Jason Barker is not here. Maybe he'll show up. But we have Karen Carpenter and Ashley, who we don't know her last name. She's kind of like Sharon Beyonce. I guess she's just a one namer. So anyway, thanks everybody for joining us. And so lots to talk about. Let's touch a little bit on the madness because that's what was my original thought for the show was this crazy Venezuela stuff. My latest Substack is about that. What do we think is happening here? I've been portraying Trump as I still say he's an actor, Trump Inside Project, but he's been kind of a do nothing, just all talk and bluster and all over the place. And now suddenly he can't stop doing bad stuff. So what is going on here? I mean, he's become the biggest interventionist maybe since Teddy Roosevelt. John, first, what do you think? Because he really was criticized for not doing anything, and now he's got ICE weaponized. They're shooting some woman in the head that I think was an American citizen. I don't know how that even happened. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think he's just finally coming out as following in the imperialist path of all the other presidents before him. I'm sorry to say, with Venezuela and the South American, Latin American area in general, you had I'll go back to Bush Senior. Bush Senior started the Andean Initiative, which used the excuse of fighting narcotics to really fight leftists in the Latin American countries, and that followed with Clinton's Plan Colombia, which did the same thing. A Washington Post article reviewed Plan Colombia and said that after Clinton spent tons of money, billions and billions of dollars, on supposedly fighting drug trafficking, which they found was really fighting leftists and was 90% military, that Bush Jr., of course, followed in the same path with Plan Colombia. And then, Obama did the same thing, put just as much resources into that area fighting leftists and with the pretense of fighting drug trafficking, when the whole history of that area is really if you go back from at least after World War II, it's really about CIA drug trafficking.
Mhm.
And the CIA's drug trafficking was huge, and that is really what's going on down there. And they use that, they tend to use that drug trafficking excuse. I mean, they use it to make money, of course. They use it to quell dissent, in our country and other countries, and they use it to topple any popular leaders, and particularly leftist, leaders in all these countries. And when they topple them with these drug lords financing it, they then, install the dictators and the, hyper capitalism and the right wing dictators that let us exploit the resources down there. And so I think Trump's just following in the same path as all the other presidents, after starting out as a non-interventionist. And he did that at the end of his presidency of the first term, where in 2017, he initiated huge sanctions on Maduro. And then in 2019, he tightened the sanctions and made the sanctions even broader against Venezuela to really try to choke off Maduro's regime, Maduro's popular election. Because Chavez was doing great with the economy in Venezuela before the sanctions. And when Maduro came into office, he was stuck with these massive sanctions that Trump instituted. But even while Chavez was in office, the CIA tried to overthrow him. They took him out for about a week, and the popular uprising brought him back to power. So there was many attempts on Chavez, and there was attempts on Maduro. Besides just the sanctions, there were CIA attempts on his life. So that's some of what I think about it.
You don't think the Venezuelans are really cheering in the streets? It seems to be old video. So we're
No,
liberated, then, right? I thought, aren't they excited about this, right? I
Yeah, I
don't think
mean, in American streets, the wealthiest Venezuelans that left the country because Maduro was redistributing a lot of the wealth, and Chavez had redistributed lots of the wealth. When because there was actual drug trafficking coming out of Venezuela in 1993 that was covered by 60 Minutes. That the Venezuelan military aided the CIA in their drug trafficking, and cocaine, and I have that in my film. 60 Minutes covered it, a ton of cocaine, with the aid of Venezuelan military. That was 1993 when Hugo Chavez was elected the popular leader, elected to office in 1999, and there was international observers watching those elections. President Carter was down there at one point and said they're very fair elections. Tons of international observers from all over the world came to watch those elections to verify those elections. And so, yeah, so I think, the majority of the people wanted Maduro in office. That's why he won by over 60%. And yeah, the wealthiest who fled and came to United States, yeah, they might be dancing in the street. I don't know, in Miami or wherever, just like the anti-Castro Cubans danced in the street, when they thought something bad was happening, when the U.S. was attacking Cuba, I guess.
What are your thoughts, Karen?
Well, I'm so glad John is here. I really, I did watch your documentary last night based on your book. I enjoyed it very much. And what I was happy to see your use of Catherine Austin Fitts and her explanation of the way that narcotics trafficking can boost neighborhoods' income and how that flows up to the stock market. I find that was a really great use of that. And she has so many pearls of wisdom and experience that apply to this situation, I feel. As also, I noticed today in doing some research that Stephen Miller and Rick Scott have been calling out, almost like the General Wesley Clark revisited the new project for the new American century with 7 nations in 5 years. They're calling out Nicaragua, Colombia, Venezuela, Greenland, Mexico, Canada. We've got our new 7.
Yeah.
And then you could add Iran, which is a holdover from the previous
right list. Yeah.
the previous 7. So I thought that was interesting. I was watching Chris Hedges had a great guest who had just written an article about Marco Rubio's ties to a lot of the Cuban Bay of Pigs exiles in Miami and their drug running, the drug running that Rubio is tied in very closely with, as far as the woman who gave him his first job was a legislature member that was connected with Noriega's court case. So I just thought there's so many interesting things that tie in there. But what I see, aside from the great history that we have of that John was just going through, that we could go nation by nation, instant by instance with Iran Contra, et cetera, is we also have the going direct reset that Catherine Austin Fitts talks about, where the bankers that met in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, 2018, and voted on going direct reset. And then we had COVID happen after that, which is a great example of disaster capitalism getting rolling there. So she feels that the Great Reset is just a marketing name for the going direct reset. But you also have Agenda 21, which was adopted in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro at the Earth Summit. So I think that many of these things that we see playing out follow right along with Agenda 21. And we're also at the end of a 4th turning. And we have the technocracy, the digital panopticon rolling in. So we have all these things coming into play at this time, as well as moving possibly from covert control, very dirty, hands-on covert control that with the narco trafficking and things, possibly to a more digital control system with AI and that type of thing. And I just feel like we're seeing a final jeopardy as far as jockeying for control. Who's going to own which resources? Who's going to control which technates in this new AI technocratic future? So I think that plays into this as well, with the move towards CBDCs trying to keep control of the petrodollar, the American dollar, and tie that. Donald Trump has a new a Liberty Bank that's going to go in, trying to issue a stable coin, and that would of course be connected to the dollar. So we need to prop up the dollar as we move forward into the new financial system, also possibly. So those are just some thoughts that I have. It's absolutely chaotic, but there are a lot of echoes back into history with Theodore Roosevelt, speak softly and carry the big stick. Well, yeah. Donald Trump is really telling you, look out for this stick I'm carrying.
And not speaking softly at all.
No, not at all. I
agree.
Absolutely.
He's got a hold of. Ashley, what are your thoughts on all this?
Yes, I'm honored to be here with all of you today, and I have loved the information that we've talked about already. So I agree. I think that from just my perspective, looking in, this is a really complicated issue. So we have this simple event of we kidnapped Maduro, and it's about oil. But of course, it's so much more than that. And what Karen was saying, and of course that John has written about, there's so much history and parapolitics in that area and our relationship with Latin America. I do think that we have so many things on the table that we are trying to decipher right now. So one of them would be, yes, in 1937, the technate, the goal to own everything from the North Pole to Panama. So I think that these are, not that I understand fully all of this, but just that is a huge consideration, especially with what Karen was talking about. They are blatantly talking about Colombia. They're blatantly talking about Cuba right now, and Greenland, of course. So I think that, and I was listening to Billy Ray Valentine with John Brisson, and they were discussing, John made a comment that I thought was really impactful. And he said, this may be, or essentially like crossing the Rubicon. This could be that, like Don was saying, that we had this do nothing president, the president of peace, the Nobel Peace Prize. And now all of a sudden, once this event happens, because we knew that they had their eyes on Venezuela. Of course, we knew that they were bombing ships illegally, but I was caught off guard by this. So what's next? Are we going to wake up one morning and say, like, the United States has invaded Greenland, the United States has invaded Cuba? What's going to happen here? So I think that there's the element of unknowing, which could be part of the strategy of tension for not only the American people, but the entire world, because everybody's watching this. We have very little resistance to what has happened at all, which is incredible. And then I think that we need to examine the relationship between Venezuela and China. Is part of this a piece of the United States jockeying for elements, for resources and things like that to prevent China from their advancing their, the AI? We're in an AI race now where we were in a space race before. Is that potentially an element? Probably. And where do we go from here? What is next? And I think that it's a very troubling time. And, part of me has questioned, what if Maduro was in on that? Of course, this is pure speculation, but what if they were playing ball? What if all of this is to continue to set up the technocracy, and we're going to have, whatever they call our United States from the North Pole to Panama, and then our opposition is BRICS. Like, we have known that this is sort of being set up to be. We've always been at war with BRICS. We've always been at war with East Eurasia. So I'm wondering if there's an element of that. I'm not saying that there is, but I'm saying that there's some other strange things about the about the kidnapping. We have 4 different outfits that he's wearing. One of them is a company that just happens to be associated with Eric Prince, and it was very easy. We have the weaponry that they mentioned, that they said that the lights were out and it was very easy, and they had perfect intelligence from the CIA down there. So there's so much going on here, and of course I would love to hear what everyone else thinks, but it's really an incredible situation with so many moving pieces.
Yeah, no, it is an incredible situation. It's just, I've talked before about, I said, after Trump's first 4 years, that you had the people with Trump derangement syndrome and the people with Trump enablement syndrome, the opposite. You had millions of people that hated him for things he never did, and you had millions of people that loved him for things he never did. Because ultimately, he really didn't do anything except bomb Syria twice when he was ordered to. But the rest of the time, they'd always talk about he was going to do it, maybe I'll do it, and threaten to do things. And just, I mean, remember the cities during the George Floyd summer of 2020, statues were being torn down everywhere. I mean, the police were standing down massively, and he did nothing. Nothing. The same guy that is now wanting to take over the world. I mean, how is this the same person? I think, again, I think he's an actor and he's following a script. But I mean, why this script now? Are we paving the world the way finally to World War III? Because this can only go on for so long. At some point, Russia has been incredibly patient for a long time. They're just, I mean, Putin just kind of holds back and doesn't do anything, and China doesn't do anything. But I mean, what would we say if Russia or China, the only countries theoretically that are powerful enough, came over and just abducted Trump? I just decided, well, we're going to try him in our country. We don't like what your election wasn't legitimate or something. How America would go nuts, but that's exactly what happened here.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
No, I totally agree that it's just incredible to go into a country and just kidnap a head of state with this ridiculous excuse of narco trafficking or narco terrorism, when we know it's about taking their, really just controlling their oil, taking their other mineral resources, their other rare earth resources, and possibly just stealing their precious metals, gold and silver, because those are the things that Trump covets. He just covets as much resources as possible, and this whole AI push is absurd and is going to need an incredible amount of energy to make it go forward. And even the technology needs silver like crazy, and the technology needs lithium and all these other resources that America doesn't have enough of, and no country really has enough of to keep up. But Venezuela does have lots of resources like that, and it's just a resource grab, like every other war in history. Most wars in history are just resource grabs, but this one in particular is just so obvious. And they always use excuses, a million other excuses, for going into these countries when it's really just to get resources and not for any kind of democracy or not to save anyone. So I think that's just what this is. And yeah, I agree with a lot of what you guys said on different notes. About Trump himself, though, what you said, Don, yeah, I do agree. There's both Trump derangement syndrome and Trump abetting syndrome, both, and both sides of it, are just acting in extremes, and we just have to watch his actions. And yeah, he was more. People have told me from other countries said, well, people are just had in other countries like India, people thought, oh, Trump was just a relief for not bombing the hell out of other countries his first term. But of course, now things are looking a little different, because he's of course bombed Venezuela, and now it looks like he might militarily go into Greenland, and we'll see where else. But all the other presidents were bombing other countries like crazy, and so I just I do think it's with basically $38 trillion in debt, America. It's ridiculous, and so his answer is, okay, well, we'll increase the military by 50, 60%, 75% to up to 1.5 trillion, he says now. And that's what he's putting out there, and I guess just take over other countries in our region. And Russia was supposed to have a military pact with Venezuela, but I think they are now surrounded by color revolutions. Kazakhstan, I believe it is, right to the south of Russia, had some kind of, really, they lost control. The people in power now are pro NATO and are dangerous for Russia. Kazakhstan, I believe it is. And then to the left, you got, of course, countries like Scandinavian countries that are right on the border of the I guess northern western tip of Russia, and they've got NATO missiles that could be nuclear armed, ready to attack Moscow. And so I just don't know if Putin, despite that military pact with Venezuela, is ready to travel and start a war with the U.S. in another part of the world, with the danger of losing control of his own area. And especially after Ukraine launched drones and to bomb his home residence, Putin's home residence, and that was intercepted. But if it wasn't, if they didn't have enough resources at that moment, Putin's home residence could have been killed, bombed, and he could have lost, so his own life or his family's life. So that's some of what seems to be happening here.
And we had to look at, though, again, this MAGA, whatever MAGA means. I don't think anybody thought it meant this. I mean, I don't remember any talk,
Yeah.
and really Trump didn't start talking about the weird Greenland stuff and the Gulf of America and taking back the Panama Canal. All that was like, I think, right after he was elected, the interim before he was inaugurated. Then suddenly, he'd never talked about any of that. And this came out of left field. It's like, what the hell is that? That's nothing to do with anything he ran on. I mean, he was breaking his promises before, but he this is something completely different. And now it's, I thought his second administration started out really promisingly. I liked Doge. I was a fan of Doge. I thought they exposed some really incredible stuff for USAID. I mean, 6,000 journalists around the world being paid by USAID, a huge extension of Operation Mockingbird alone.
Yeah.
Just imagine. And then, but Trump goes from saying, yeah, Elon Musk, we should audit the Pentagon. Let's do that. And then he proposes $1 trillion budget, the largest ever. And now it's going to be 1.5 trillion, as John said, I guess, to cover all these, occupations and annexes, I guess, of all these countries. But we've gone from a total, we were concentrating on domestic policy, which is where we should be. This country's crumbling and falling apart. Now it's all this nonsense again. Let's go over there, and distract the people. Karen, what are your thoughts on that?
I've always seen Trump as a bit, as of a Trojan horse, especially. I always questioned him. I kind of knew his background, knowing that he was a member of the WWF Hall of Fame, and
yes,
just the whole lead up to this second election. It was just such the greatest show on earth. All the world's a stage. My mom even asked me, she's 87, lifelong Democrat, is all this fake? So was that assassination for Trump, was that staged? And I said, well, Mom, you have to remember that he is a member of the Wrestling Hall of Fame, and so I thought it was interesting that here she is, a lifelong Democrat, questioning these things. And my brothers were pretty reasonable people, and we've all just kind of come to the conclusion, we don't talk politics much, but that we just really don't have any good choices anymore, and we're all just really disgusted with what's going on. Yet I know some people who just think that Trump's the most wonderful thing, and it's true what he said about he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and nobody would care, or his supporters wouldn't care. That truly does seem to be the truth. There are some people, it doesn't matter what he does, what he says, how he says it. He's just the most, and to me, that speaks to the power of the media, of entrainment, of MK Ultra, of the whole. What your documentary and your work is about, John, is the way that we're manipulated by the CIA through these weapons, which is what I see the television as, and the cell phones, and the culture wars, Tavistock, and just that whole 9 yards. That's the way that people are so polarized. That's been an agenda, absolutely. And now we're being put into our own little bubbles. Not only are we pitted against each other as parties in this country, the Democrats and the Republicans are, but then we're also getting to where we have our own personal algorithms through the media, through being online. So we are going into our own little bubbles. We've been siloed by LGBTQ plus, I don't even know all the letters, and then the all of these different agendas, the race, color, age. Now they're bad mouthing certain generations, and it's just a constant division, divide and conquer. And then so it's just incredible to me what's going on, and that Donald Trump can basically say, I want that. I want Greenland. We need it. I'm telling you, nobody's going to, and then Stephen Miller, others saying nobody's going to fight us for it. If the president's been very clear, we want Greenland. He wants Greenland for our national security sphere, for our security matrix. We want Greenland. We've been clear about that. No, there's no military that's going to fight us about it. He's, it's just kind of like, put up or shut up. It's really astounding to me that that's the point that we are as a society.
No, there's no question about it. And
I guess I'm mostly just venting at my frustration about the instability and the devolution and the degradation of the culture morally and every other way. Don and I are, fairly close in age, and just to see what was allowed to be on television when we were kids, and to see what's going on now, and the way that pornography is an everyday thing, and it's pushed on the children, and it's almost impossible unless you're going to raise a Luddite child not to have them exposed to those things. So it's really frustrating, but it's quite challenging.
Yeah, there's no question. And you and I think agree on a lot of stuff, Karen, but I think this is, and I'm reacting, maybe overreacting to what Trump did but it's because of his personality. Because as I wrote in my Substack, I went back to Mossadegh in Iran, and the last over 70 years. I mean, we have a history of doing this. We did the exact same thing to Marcos in the Philippines under Reagan. They abducted him and his wife. They just took him out because he won an election. They didn't want him to win. They had Jimmy Carter, he was part of an international team of observers that went there, because nobody observes our elections, but we went there because, we have clean elections and never any fraud. But they admitted, hey, even though they wanted Cory Aquino desperately to win, they admitted, no, we can't find any chicanery. But it didn't matter. They wanted Cory Aquino in power, so that just as Maduro, as John said, won 60% of the vote. They didn't want him in power. So they just take him out and they make up whatever reason. In Marcos's case, I forget what they even were going to charge him with, but he died before he could go to trial. And then his wife, Imelda, who was slandered for having too many shoes, if you remember.
That's all I remember about her.
Time she committed, but she actually was acquitted in court somehow. I don't know how, but it was very odd. But they've done this over and over again. You have Noriega, who he just invaded, just took, he was a Panamanian strongman suddenly, Manuel. I heard somebody call Maduro a strongman. I don't know what you have to be a strongman, but apparently Maduro is one. And they took him out after he had been, a patsy of ours. He was an ally. They took him out, and he was in prison for, I think, 30 years before he died. And for what? For being an ally because he trusted the wrong people, the U.S. government. Hussein, obviously, was our boy in the Iraq-Iran war. We backed him. We gave him the poison gas that he supposedly used on Iranians. And again, you saw what happened to him, and he went back to Iraq where they killed him. We killed his two sons first. So we've done these horrible things over and over again. Bin Laden, we don't know what happened. And we claim we killed him when he was already dead, I think, and claim we threw his body in the ocean according to the Muslim tradition. We just lie and do these crazy things. But so this is really in that tradition. It's just that because it's Donald Trump, it looks worse because of what he ran on. He ran against business as usual. He criticized the CIA. He's the only president was going up against, supposedly. And you had Tulsi Gabbard as director of national intelligence. You can't get anybody. I mean, I was smitten with her. I went to her campaign rally and had my picture taken with her. And but she talked about against all these these regime changes, and specifically talked about Venezuela. After this happened, she issued some stupid thing about how great it was. And it's a shame. It's terrible, but I think it shows you that you can't. There's nothing you can do to fight this. Ashley, what are your thoughts about this?
Yes, I feel a couple things. So first of all, I find it very interesting that we are in a place, referencing what Karen is talking about, where we find ourselves, that these things are so blatantly in our face now. I feel like that is a huge difference, because even though before, I think in retrospect, we can see that many of these topics, many of the regime changes and the coups and all of these things that they were, obviously we were lied to about them, but this was just so blatantly obvious. I feel that this is a message. Of course, that is speculation on my part, but I just think that there is some reason that they are able to feel confident enough to just do this type of thing out in the open without little pretense or with very little pretense. And I've talked about this before. I find it very concerning that they are able to just identify anyone that they choose to as a narco terrorist. What does that even mean? We know that it is a very bad news for the individual that is classified as a terrorist in any form by the United States government. And so I find that to be concerning. And then on the heels of the driving incident with ICE in Minnesota this week, they classified her as a domestic terrorist. And I feel like I don't even want to get into it. I think this is the blue and black dress or the white and gold dress all over again. Obviously, I do not approve of ICE shooting people. I have problems with ICE being, the standing military that we were warned about. But without even getting into that, I thought that there were so many different camera angles that people were like, well, look at it this way. It's sped up. It's slowed down. There's just so much ambiguity in the video. And I think that these things it's hard to believe that it's a coincidence that everyone's fighting about this, that yes, she deserved it. No, she didn't deserve it. And this is what is sort of taking the eye off the ball at this time. But they called her a domestic terrorist. So no matter what you think on either side of that argument, being a protester, and even if you're doing something wrong, that does not make you a domestic terrorist. So I find the precedent that is being set under the Trump administration very, very concerning for a million different reasons. And obviously the forever wars, we all want the forever wars to end. We want cooperation. We want peace. I'm concerned about what does this mean for militarily going forward? I've talked about this before. There were images that are being shown even from mainstream ABC that they are starting to train the military again in the jungles in Panama. And the images of that bring up images of Vietnam, which of course is horrifying to even think that Vietnam could be repeated. I mean, I know again that we've had endless wars, but it was a terrible tragedy what happened there. So even evoking the images of that is scary to me. And I'm concerned about how blatantly this is in our face. And talk about warp speed. This is warp speed. With Trump 2.0, what we are seeing happen in front of our faces feels like an expedition or expediting everything that we have been seeing leading up to 9/11, the Patriot Act, and beyond, and certainly with the COVID times. So I have more questions than anything, but just some of these observations are very, very concerning to me. And I just wonder what's next. Where are we headed next?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that, again, when we're looking at it, Trump, even when Trump's rhetoric was good, mostly, he had a really excessive love of police. He loves the police, and he always has. So you kind of knew that he was going to like this idea. I mean, he can do no wrong. But, this is the main reason I voted for Trump in 2016 is because of immigration. The first time somebody said, let's do something about it. But he didn't do anything about it for 4 years. He deported fewer people than Obama. And actually, supposedly, he deported fewer people than Biden this time, actually deported them. But he's got the ICE agents running around like all the rest of our militarized police, and they seem to be concentrating on citizens. This is not hard. If you've got millions, we don't know how many millions of illegal immigrants are in the country. I don't understand why you're not focusing on that, but they don't seem to be. They go to the wrong apartment building, and they're not citizens, and they throw people around. In this case, this woman, and yeah, she's the right, typical. Apparently, I guess her wife was there filming it or something. So they've made all that into an issue. So I guess she deserved to be shot in the head. And that's the problem we have here is, yeah, she was, I don't know what she was doing, revving or acting with these crazy people, but you don't shoot them in the head. I mean, she didn't have a weapon. That's crazy. And this has created a huge problem. And as I said, you can go to, you send your ICE agents to Home Depot parking lots. I mean, we all know where people gather for day work. If you want to find the people here legally, it's pretty easy to figure out where to go to begin with. I don't see them doing that. Instead, they're acting like the rest of our police, SWAT team type stuff, excessive force, which you saw here. And it's just sad because I see the breakdown. The right is Tim Pool, and my big suspicions about before this, but he's watched it from every angle, and the cop was justified. How you justified ever in shooting an unarmed person in the head? That's exactly what they did to Ashley Babbitt, and the right was outraged by that justifiably. But now it's different because of that. So I don't know. That's kind of a long-winded thing, but I'm very concerned about these militarized police, and they're not accomplishing the mission. The mission was to supposedly to deport a mass deportation. I don't see that happen. Am I wrong, John? Am I missing the mass deportation and seeing all this other stuff?
Well, I think my understanding is Obama. What I heard on the radio today, for example, is Obama deported about 3.5 million people, and that was more than any president before him. Bush was second, a distant second. Bush Jr. was a distant second. And so, it's just a matter of, I don't know why he didn't get attention for all those deportations, Obama. But to me, most of the presidents are doing these kinds of things. And but the attention is obviously on the way. Maybe Trump is doing it. I don't know. And he, as you say, he's not, I don't even know how many he's deporting, but the way he's doing is bizarre. And the ski masks, they say, is to protect these ICE agents, but the ski mask and pushing the people's heads down is bizarre images to make it more fascistic, maybe to scare us. I really don't know. I don't know what the purpose of this is. The whole making the shooting was horrible, of course, this woman, but making it into like this huge story that's gonna launch George Floyd like protests is bizarre, because George Floyd was just like the tip of a massive iceberg of killing of unarmed black men, and women for decades, or a century, you could say. And so it's just a very different matter than one killing of a protester of current ice stuff. So the media is trying to distract us from something, and maybe it's the Venezuelan attack and the coming Greenland attack. Maybe it's the fact
the Epstein files. What happened to the Epstein files? They were just starting to be released, and now that's kind of receded into the background.
Yeah, maybe it's the Epstein files for sure, and the Epstein files should really, ideally, if the Epstein files were all released, massive amount of people would be lose their lose their credibility, would lose office from Democrat and Republican parties, because so many were involved in the Epstein case, and they have them on film. There was cameras and everywhere. It was a big blackmail scheme. I wrote an article about that in 2021 or 2022 for a magazine, and later, Whitney Webb turned this whole issue into a book. But I wrote in the article, I just talked about there's cameras everywhere, there's drugs everywhere, and there's pedophilia everywhere. So it's obviously a huge blackmail scheme. And this blackmail scheme, I just want to mention, was happening in South America in the 1950s and 60s, I believe, at least the 1960s, because the history of the situation in Latin America was started after World War II, when the CIA, OSS, and then what became the CIA in 1947, gave fugitive status to an estimated between 5 and 50,000 Nazis. Okay, they were trafficked. They were sent down to those countries, and those all those Nazis then colluded with what became cocaine lords, and started cultivating the cocaine in a huge way. And then the CIA worked with them to get that cocaine just trafficked, to the U.S. and other parts of the world. And along with that became Operation Condor, which then led those cocaine traffickers to lead cocaine coups, they call them. Peter Dale Scott, the great writer on that region, wrote about these cocaine coups down there, and so these Nazi fugitives like Klaus Barbie in Bolivia, like Mengele in Paraguay. In Paraguay is where they got all the files, where they found all the files on Operation Condor. And Argentina was the first place. Argentina was the biggest place. It happened to have the largest Nazi
Well, that's where
population.
Hitler lived for decades, right? Hitler was in
Yeah,
Argentina.
yeah, and Chile also. Chile and Argentina was Operation Condor was the biggest. But the Boys from Brazil came out as a movie about all the Nazis down in Brazil, and so it was fictional, but it was really based on true stuff going on down there. And so that was cultivated to take away democracy from all these countries that had liberated themselves from the Spanish control and Paraguayan, I'm sorry, the Portuguese control, and turned it into American control and American exploitation of the resources. And they didn't want any kind of actual real popular leader to rise up, and they had their colonies, these German colonies, that use techniques such as having parties, inviting politicians, and having a bunch of young boys and girls that were apparently drugged and brainwashed, and that were having sex with all these politicians and all these important people in the country, and blackmail, and they were caught on film, and blackmail was used to control these important, powerful people in all these countries. And they also, it was found, New York Times wrote about the Chilean colony, German colony called Colonial Dignidad, which was run by a Nazi doctor named Peter Schaefer. And then when New York Times covered this in about 2006 or so, they said that they had an army's worth of weapons. They had tons of drugs. They had torture chambers, and they had their own airspace that the rest of Chile was not allowed to fly through. And that can be repeated in every country. There was a colony like that powerful in all the major countries of Condor: Brazil, Chile, Argentina, I believe, yeah, and Bolivia. A number of these major countries all had this, and that's some of the way the CIA used these Nazi fugitives and to control all these countries. And when popular leaders such as, say, Salvador Allende in Chile won his election, of course they toppled him. They came in and bombed the palace, presidential palace, toppled him, and then you get the U.S. puppet dictator Pinochet running the country for the next couple decades up to about 1990, and disappearing tens of thousands of leftists. And when my wife went down to Argentina at one point when she was in just out of veterinary school in the first 5 or 10 years that she was a veterinarian, she visited the veterinary school in Argentina and saw all these paintings of people on the walls that were disappeared. And she was like, veterinary students were disappeared? Why in the world? And we're not political. But they were somewhat political, while they're in vet school, when you have no time to be political, and they were disappeared. And that's just the way that's that history of that area and the history of the CIA and U.S. intelligence and the way things are done. So very sad, but yeah. And, of course, you got the Dulles brothers represented United Fruit Company. They were the lawyers for United Fruit, which became Chiquita Banana. And that's the corporate connection of, because, Chiquita Banana was apparently, I saw, read articles and cite them, how they were helping cocaine, shipments of cocaine get through. And more recently in Philadelphia, J.P. Morgan owned ship, huge tanker, had a ton of cocaine on it within the last 5 years. It was caught in Philadelphia. And, so this stuff's been just going on forever. But now Trump is blatantly just doing a hostile takeover, instead of using a surreptitious way of pretending like it's someone else taking over or it's an internal war. It's just a hostile takeover, and be more blatant about. And now we're going to take over Greenland, and now we're going to maybe Canada's next, and Mexico's next, or Cuba's next. And sad, but the only thing I can say about it is a little more blatant about it, which just exposes it a little more than the Democrats are a little more hidden about it. Though I think maybe President Carter, maybe of course the Kennedys were a little less imperialistic, of course, which is good than the other presidents. But that's the sad history.
No, it's very sad. Jason Barker's in the chat. Jason, I sent you an invitation along with Ashley and Karen, the same invitation. So Ashley, why don't you can you email him the link?
Yes,
like
I can.
Jason, she'll email it to you, and just jump right in if you'd like to, contribute, because he was in the military, and he can talk about some of that. But yeah, because I hate to, and I badmouth the military and the police too much, but it's just me. But I wrote a Substack about her history of it, and it's this. But you can already see, and again, the establishment, they're not going to attack Trump. He could be impeached over this more logically than anything else they've talked about, but they won't. The New York Times supports it. They love him. CNN was talking about it, just basically with that question said, "We own Venezuela now."
It's crazy. It's so sad to hear Bernie Sanders even say, "I'm against this invasion," but Maduro was a dictator. I can't believe he said that. I actually, worked, helped his campaign out way back when, and now I hear this. It's disgusting. It's too bad.
Yeah, exactly. He was a dictator, and that's their excuse. They're always, even though most of the time Noriega, Bin Laden, Hussein, usually they were our guys before, and were affiliated with the CIA. But then suddenly they become strongmen or dictators or whatever they're going to call them, and then it justifies this guy Maduro. But I know I have an Iranian dentist, and he was telling me about how Maduro was very close to Iran. He's very anti-Zionist. I think that's probably the real reason for this, I'm guessing, because usually our foreign policy is completely dictated by what Israel's interests are. And I said, what interest does Israel have in Venezuela? I guess that's it. I don't know, but I haven't heard any criticism from there.
Machado backed by Israel? Wasn't Karina Machado at the wall recently? She was also backed by. I'm sorry. She was backed by Bush in 2002, wasn't it?
Yeah, she was backed by Bush. Sure, she was backed by a lot of Republicans, but.
I know the picture of her at the Wailing Wall.
I'm the whole Israel thing is just like this tiny little place. It's just, to me, it's about the oil interests, and the U.S. intelligence interest with all these drugs. That's because we went into Vietnam for opium, we went into Afghanistan for opium. Now we're going, and we were interested down there for the cocaine, as well as the oil. We went to. Oil is, to me, the main interest down there, and the other resources.
Well, this is more of an old thing, because you're right. But before the 1980s, when the neocons were born and the Reagans, we did. There wasn't any visible Israeli interest in Vietnam or Korea, whatever. And but since that time, it seems like everything we've done has been okay. Who does Israel want us to attack? And that's certainly Iran would be number one on the list for whatever reason. But you're right. This evokes memories of the poppy fields in Vietnam and all this stuff. Is this why we're going for that? And oil. I mean, why do we think that we own? I don't understand. The oil is in another country. What? And they're actually making the argument this is ours. And he's bombed, I think, 2 different Russian ships over. And again, Russia, they're not doing anything. I mean, I hope they don't do anything, but I forget whose turn it is. Who is this? Karen, Ashley, who is it?
I think it's my turn.
Who did I talk to? Go ahead, Karen. Go ahead.
Well, I was just doing a little research, listening to Gard Goldsmith's show yesterday, Liberty Conspiracy, and he does fantastic coverage. And he played a clip of Chris Wright, the energy secretary, at a Goldman Sachs energy conference, and he said that the USA is taking charge of Venezuelan crude sales, and will be in charge, and will be marketing them and shipping them and taking the profits. And then, of course, Pam Bondi, didn't she say that the profits from the Venezuelan oil sales would settle? I found that interesting, settling like fallout in American bank accounts, and then they would be distributed as somebody saw fit. But yes, that we are saying, we quote unquote, we are going to be in charge of the crude oil sales in Venezuela. I find it interesting what John, more of the history that you're talking about there, how, well, first of all, how Operation Paperclip ties in so closely to all of this, and how the same type of operations that we saw in the United States with MK Ultra and the Epstein, I look at them as control files. You get some goods on people, and then you hang on to that and you use it as needed. And of course, people who have proclivities toward unsavory behaviors may be targeted also. But I think also a lot of the reason that we aren't seeing the Epstein files is that this is also a money laundering operation. It's a huge money laundering operation. And that so many of since FASB 56, so many, we already have a lot of black operations and funding being hidden, but since FASB 56, a lot more has been able to go off the books in a dark budget. And so we have all of these activities. I think it started with the church committee around that time in the mid 70s when Congress wasn't funding things, a lot of the things that wanted. So they started, the CIA started doing a lot of black ops and gun running and more narcotics trafficking, even more, to fund things that Congress wouldn't fund. So then you need to have those money laundering opportunities. And I think Epstein had a large part to do with that, or he was one of many. I'm sure it was a much larger operation with offshore banks and things. And so I think that if you expose that money laundering operation and all of that web, more of that web, we need that now. If we're going to be expanding and going into these and upping our game more openly in other countries, we need to maintain those connections with all of these people that are used to all of these unsavory activities and raising this money that's off the books. And then I wanted to mention, I've been reading a book by an MK Ultra victim, and I just want to mention this to John. It's this one is called Sparky, Surviving Sex Magic, by a doctor named Juliet Engel, who says that she was sold. Are you familiar with her?
Not, no.
She says she was sold to Vito Polakis in the with the Freaks.
Oh, wow.
Her father, she says, and you can, I haven't verified it. I've seen a lot of interviews she's done. She's written 3 books, and she talks about being one of the girls that was used to compromise in Laurel Canyon. Yeah,
wow.
In Laurel Canyon. And Ashley and I are both into Dave McGowan's work. I have
he's great.
I have mine right here. But I noticed that Juliet Engel actually talks about being sold to Vito as a 6-year-old. And she's about 75 years old. She was sold in the mid 50s.
Wow.
And this is just what she alleges, but she is alive and doing interviews. And if you wanted to speak to her, she might be someone that might be interesting for you to speak to.
Remind me, send me her name and get out if you have contact info. That sounds interesting.
I'm sorry, Don. She became a doctor, and she was an intern in the Seattle area in the Pacific Northwest at the hospital where all of the doctors from Parkland Hospital that were so harassed and so many, they all moved to the hospital where Juliet Engel was an intern. And she says that she was taught to do a tracheotomy by the doctor that did the tracheotomy on JFK, and that he told her that was an entrance wound.
Probably Malcolm Perry.
Yes, it was Malcolm Perry. So she talks about that in her interviews and her books too. Working with Malcolm Perry as
you got to send me her info again. I gotta.
Juliet Engel.
You see, Jason Barker.
I wanted to mention that to you because you have so many more connections and dots in your head than I do about that.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, that's good. Jason, I just before because we're going to talk about showbiz and stuff too. Jason Barker gives us a more informed opinion. The argument is that we gave Venezuela the tech to get the oil so our guys can drill for it. The drilling stopped recently and China signed a lease. So I guess that's their. I mean, but again, I don't trust anything they say, so I have no confidence in them. But I guess that's their theoretical. We did this, so it's our oil. I think that's a bit of a stretch. Ashley, you have any thoughts on this? And then we're going to go to John's his some really interesting stuff. His work.
Perfect. So yeah, the last thing, and this is not something that I came up with on my own, but just in looking at this issue, it was suggested that because of the anti-Zionist sentiment that was held by Maduro and the oh my gosh, I'm blanking right now, but the guy that was the president beforehand, that this because we're taking yes, Chavez. Because we would be taking over these oil resources, that would allow for us to, what Karen was talking about earlier, the invasion of Iran, taking that last country off of the chessboard, because we would have the supplemental oil. We would not be dependent on them. So that would, again, we would be acting like what Don was saying, in the interest of Israel. If that does happen, because we would have that, we're running it, so we would not be missing the resources that we would get from Iran should they choose to attack and address Iran. So that's the other thing that I wanted to add on that particular issue. And just this is more of a question, but on the subject of the drugs, the idea that the narco terrorists are in Venezuela, I think that we all know that fentanyl and the opiates, particularly heroin or Oxycontin, have been much more deadly than cocaine in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And so I not that it matters, not that they care to give us the truth, not that anyone is holding them accountable, but even if they're not even giving us the pretense of providing numbers for us, like, oh, we're expecting X amount of decrease in deaths in this country in a certain amount of time because we're taking deadly drugs off the streets. And I think that it is very clear that it's not about drugs. And I know that probably anyone watching this doesn't think that it's about drugs either, but it's just very disturbing to see that, like John's book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us. We have seen the weapons be used in the drugs be used in a million different ways to interrupt communities, to take people who could be productive citizens off of the chessboard. We see this, this despair tourism that people will show online, the streets of Philadelphia, what has been done to America. And it's very, it's horrible. It's tragic. And we would think that that would be a priority of limiting deaths of despair in this country from addiction. And yet we are getting the talking point about drugs, but we are not seeing an improvement in the quality of life for people. And I don't know. I would love to get John's feedback on this. How do we even come back from this when you appear to have such a huge addiction problem in this country because of the, this is something that Don talks about in his writing, is the dysfunction that has been cultivated in the family. A strong family unit is very important for a healthy, well-adjusted person. And that has been chipped away at. And now we have a huge addiction problem. Addiction to, like Karen was talking about, the devastation that porn causes. So it's porn, it's drugs, it's all of these things that cause people to not be healthy.
Gambling's a big one too now.
Yes, gambling. Yes. And it's a war on us in a million different ways. So how do we even come back from that to get back to a healthy, well-adjusted place? And obviously we know that it was never about drugs. We know that it was the Sackler family and it was Purdue Pharma that specifically targeted Appalachia to go after them with Oxycontin. They lied. They courted doctors. They gave them huge bonuses. I mean, all of these things that are real issues in America that really matter, that have wrought real death and destruction in people's lives. And they don't even bother providing us with information of when we can expect people to stop being addicted, to stop standing like a zombie on the street. They don't even bother to do us that courtesy.
Let me say there's also cell phone addiction, technology addiction, and all the chemicals in the food engine, the nicotine, the cigarette lobby moved toward making food addictive, food additives addictive. So we've got, it seems like everybody's addicted to something basically.
Well, this is a good time, I think, to go because I first came to know of John, whose book "Weapons as Drugs Against Us," and this is film with the same name, which is very interesting. You can watch it. I think you can still watch it online. John will tell us, but this guy's asked. Twisted Pistols asked me, I think, 3 times in the chat, who is Keith D? He wants to know what you think of Keith. Who is that?
Keefe D is the former gang member who was accused of murdering Tupac Shakur.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, and so yeah, I can address that if he wants me to, but I'd try to keep that short because I could go on for a very long time about that. I don't want to do that since the show is more about.
Well, let's talk about how this, because I mean, Tupac is involved, I guess, in this drugs as weapons against us. How did this idea come about, and tell us a little bit about it?
For drugs as weapons against us.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was I started having my own drug problem in high school and was lucky to like wean off of most drugs in my life by early college but it just led me to explore drugs and the drug world a bit. First in college a little bit, and like the history of acid and LSD and things of that nature. And then after college, I really started getting more into activism because I started getting into activism like anti-apartheid activism my first year of college and other forms of activism, anti-war activism a bit in college. And but the drugs, really like hurt my brain the first year of college. And there was a lot of private school kids. I went to a public school, and private school kids were all ahead of me with all these, all the incredible, huge amount of papers I had to write and stuff like that. And I had to try to catch up, especially after hurting my brain with drugs. And so after college, I got more into activism again, got back into activism and just started doing drug counseling for a living. And when I was doing drug counseling for a living, I'm just getting so much information from addicts every day who said, "Oh, my father, we're saying, everyone knows that we don't own boats and planes and stuff like that to bring the drugs in, so it must be the government bringing the drugs in." And everyone knows that, and just different other things like that, which made a lot of sense. And I did see the corruption in Baltimore for 6 months working as a parole and probation officer, believe it or not, for 6 months before becoming a drug counselor, and saw the corruption in the courts and the corruption in the neighborhood I was working in with drug traffickers getting light sentences and the big small time street dealer getting big sentences, and so I ended up just exploring a lot of the stories of my clients and exploring kind of other activist magazines accounts of like Covert Action Quarterly, which I ended up writing for, which was the CIA whistleblowing magazine started by Phil Agee and now continued by his son, Phil Agee's son, or his name I just forget, it's terrible, Chris Agee, I'm sorry, he was a professor now. And so I've still written for them. It's been a while, but I still write for them at least once or twice a year in between my films and and books. But I'm working full time as a psychotherapist now, specializing in trauma. But when so I ended up finding the history of acid with a book by Martin Lee, who wrote the book called Acid Dreams, which exposed a different history of LSD. And the CIA's, the subtitle of that book was the CIA, LSD, and the complete social history of that and the 60s. And that just exposed to me that like one of the top world traffickers of LSD was found to be a U.S. intelligence agent since 1960. And I met someone from a group that when I was trying to block the streets in Washington D.C., living in Baltimore, to stop the Iraq War. I was sitting next to someone who said, "Oh, I work with this group," and she gave me a copy of the Kerry report that showed that the CIA was working with groups to traffic cocaine, from Latin America into the U.S. and just found all kinds of different evidence of the CIA involvement in all kinds of drugs, and that led me to write the book and then the film out of it, and it's just huge. And so I really ended up exploring MK. What I found was a lot of it was under a Operation MK Ultra, and which had 149 sub projects, because it was basically an umbrella project. MK Ultra was an umbrella project of all these other projects they had already been working on, and expanding that even more to these 149 sub projects. And that was LSD might have been one of their top drugs, but obviously cocaine, heroin, and ecstasy, MDMA, or they call ecstasy, or Molly, was another big one. They can end up being another big one, and those are some of the drugs they used to, as you guys talked about, disrupt both individuals functioning, family functioning, and community functioning. Because one cocaine or heroin addict can destroy so many people around them, and basically destroy a whole community with the illegality and the money it takes to get the drug. You have to steal and rob, and then the money and the profits involved in it. Gangs form and are actually encouraged by U.S. intelligence. And the gangs end up, fighting over street turf, and there's gang wars, and the property values go down. And when anyone tries to get those gangs to, turn into activists and get away from the dealing, then there's an attack on the gangs, and an attack on any of the gang leaders that are trying to do that. And now I never worked at the Turk House, as someone's asking, but I know the Turk House very well in Baltimore. It was known as a good free place for helping someone detox off of drugs. Turk House in Baltimore. So I worked first in Baltimore, and then I worked in Washington, D.C., and I worked in New York doing addictions counseling. And I worked part-time while I was at Columbia University getting a counseling degree, along with studied community organizing and politics a bit with sociologist Richard Cloward, who wrote some great books with his wife, Frances Fox Piven. They were great professors up there that taught me a lot about all kinds of things around politics and in the state. So it's basically how I got into it.
What did you so you basically now? What is because I don't know. We have a couple Tupac fans in the
okay,
I guess in the chat, but I know nothing about him very much. Did you? I don't know if you've ever seen Jason Whitlock's Fearless podcast. He's one of my favorite podcasts. He does a lot of sports, but he's really yeah. But he had a thing where he was talking about Tupac, and he had you've probably seen it. You've done a lot of research on it, John, but I was shocked. I didn't know nothing about him, but all I know is he had the thug life persona, and he was, all these tattoos, and you're thinking of him, he's a tough guy. He found an interview of him when he was either a senior in high school or just out of high school, and it's completely different persona. It's very effeminate. He is. I mean, it's the farthest thing from a thug you have ever seen. I don't know if you've seen that, and I instantly thought
he's got like a high hairdo kind of thing. It's like
maybe he does not act at all like Tupac. Are you familiar with that interview?
Yeah, I think I know the one you're talking about. I think he's wearing what do you call it? Well, I think I know what one you're talking about. It's actually one that Kevin Durant refers to when he I believe Kevin Durant referred to because he's seen a ton of Tupac stuff, and it led him to get a tattoo of Tupac on his leg. And he basically said that Tupac, you see these political interviews of him when he was so young. He was probably about 17. That interview, it was when he just had to go to California because there were some murders of his fellow activists, black activists in his neighborhood right around him in Baltimore. So he went to California thinking he would get away from that. And he talks a lot about politics in that interview. He's just, I think, sitting on the ground much of the time when they're filming him, in that interview. Is that was one you're talking about? But either way, I think it's that one. And basically, he went to the Baltimore School for the Arts, and teachers I talked to there said that he was, known as the, best actor in the school. He was elected to be the representative of the school for political assemblies in the Baltimore City area to represent the school, and he was just a brilliant young guy. He only pretended to be a gangster in order to appeal to gangs and politicize them, and that was a plan with his stepfather, Matulu Shakur, who was who got a degree in acupuncture and revolutionized the use of acupuncture to fight drug addiction. We had a place called Lincoln Detox in the Bronx, and so Tupac was this hyper political kid. Grew up with his mother, at one time leader of the Harlem Black Panthers. His mother's first husband was Lumumba Shakur, who started the Harlem Black Panthers. His uncle was Zaid Shakur, who was a leader of the Bronx Black Panthers. His godfather was Geronimo Pratt, who was a leader of the LA Black Panthers. So he was like Black Panther royalty. He was in that family, extended family of Black Panther leaders. And that's why the Black community, just looks up to him so much, because he was raised in that. His mother said she raised him to be a Black Prince of the Revolution. That's the way he was raised, and he was brilliant. He could, quote Winnie Mandela, Nelson Mandela's wife's books off the top of his head, according to his first manager, who also loved, Winnie Mandela and the whole South African, apartheid movement kind of literature that came out when South African politics and anti-apartheid movement and stuff. And so he was just this brilliant young man who also could rewrite Shakespeare in modern language. And he directed and starred in, and wrote, directed, and starred in these plays out in California, doing that when he had to move to California for his senior year of high school. And so there was and so he got there was a point though where his he just was convinced to develop this thug persona, because there was a gang peace truce movement spreading throughout LA that his Black Panther extended family helped engender. Got Bloods and Crips leaders to come together and call peace truces throughout LA after the Rodney King riots. And actually it was right before the Rodney King riots. It's when some people, some Black members of the community were shot in cold blood by the police and killed before the Rodney King riots. But then around the time of the Rodney King riots, they thought, okay, Tupac, you can help extend this in a big way. And he took on this persona, pretended to be this thug, this gangster, in order to appeal to gangs and politicize them. But that's not, of course, who he really was. So he took on the persona and became an actor in that way, not just starring in major motion pictures like he did, but also trying to spread this, appeal to gangs as if he's one of them. And he got them. He got gang leaders to shake hands and call peace truces throughout LA, in different parts of California, and that spread throughout the country, to the point that the head of the Latin Kings told me in an interview I did with him that they were inspired by the Black peace truce movement, and that's why
what would you think of
activism.
What would you think of it? Because Whitlock's hypothesis, basically, the inference is that he was hired by someone, that he was playing a role, and he was installed. And what do you think he did this all on his own? Because I mean, it's remarkable that he made a transformation like that.
No, he did this on his own, because it was just part of that plan with Matulu Shakur. And so they developed they wrote out this plan. It's called the Thug Life Code, the Code of Thug Life. And it was about, it sounds, the thug was what people called, people his age when he was growing up, and, you're a bunch of thugs. But it was really just a code to try to cause more peace and to get these gang members to just not hurt people in their own community as much, to not do this, not do that, just to take the violence down in their communities and to try to convert them. And actually, when they converted the Latin kings with the help of the young lords, the Latino version of the Black Panthers, who were trained by Bobby Seale. Bobby Seale trained Jose Chichi Jimenez, the founder of the Young Lords, to become what they were, turn a big time gang, Latino, Puerto Rican gang, into what was like the Puerto Rican Black Panthers. And they were popular in New York and Chicago, were the biggest places, but they were popular in other cities too. But they followed Bobby Seale around and converted, and so that's what Tupac was really part of. Was this movement of former Black Panthers, former Young Lords that converted, Latin Kings that converted, Black Panther. That converted Bloods and Crips, like gang sects that were active throughout the country and even in the military, and that's why Tupac was such a threat. He was a threat because he was, in danger of getting all these gang members to turn on to activism, left-wing activism, anti-war, anti-racist activism throughout the country. And it was also taking huge amounts of drug dealing off the streets. All these gangs dealt drugs. Latin Kings dealt drugs up a storm. But when there was a operation called Operation Crown in New York City, where they captured 50 of the leaders of the Latin Kings throughout New York City, they found no drugs whatsoever on them. And they had already converted to the Almighty Latin King and Queen Nation. This was documented in a Columbia University published book by two professors who documented their change, as part of this whole movement, and found they'd stopped drug dealing. So, as you had mentioned, Catherine Austin Fitts documented that several drug dealers, when they deal drugs daily, they can produce a change in the stock market worth millions of dollars, because all this cash, pure cash, is laundered into these stock companies and corporations, and it ends up causing it to be a 20-time. It's thought that with this amount of cash now, for over 20 years, the stock could increase this much. And it causes a huge difference in the amount of money. The laundered money is worth so much more than it's just the amount it says. It's worth 20 times that, she says. And that's why when you take 1,000 possible dealers off the street, you really have put billions and billions, like tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in change in stock value. And so that's why Tupac, the U.S. intelligence needed to be successful with their taking out Tupac, and they did, of course. And when U.S. intelligence, they first tried to take him out with the FBI and police intelligence working for the FBI, but the final time was about the 6th time they tried. It was the CIA really involved, because the CIA was intimately connected with Death Row Records. It was Freeway Ricky Ross's, one of his 2 right-hand men that started Death Row Records. And Freeway Ricky Ross, we know, was getting his cheap cocaine from CIA assets in Latin America, from the Nicaraguan Contras who were working for the CIA. I mean, Gary Webb called the CIA, Nicaraguan Contras, like a wholesale arm of the CIA. Yeah, and that's where that cocaine was coming to Freeway Ricky Ross, and then to a guy named Michael Harry O'Harris, who a judge found was the real, founder of Death Row Records.
I think Alex Jones had Freeway Ricky Ross on his show years ago when he was doing better work. So, and that's, I know if we're talking about going and getting narco terrorists, whatever they call them, then it'll look at our own CIA, because it's pretty obvious they shipped crack cocaine to the inner cities and then killed Gary Webb when he revealed it.
Yeah.
And then Trump just pardoned the former president of the Honduras, who was like, I don't know, he must have been a bigger drug dealer than Maduro. He had like 400 pounds of cocaine or something. I mean, it's ridiculous. Yeah, that was the real narco terrorist. I mean, there's Maduro. Chavez and Maduro got rid of drugs in Venezuela, got rid of the trafficking. I'm not saying could get rid of it completely, but basically got rid of it on a government scale, because the government for them was aiding the CIA in drug trafficking. And the Chavez government got rid of that and nationalized the oil, and that's made their money off the nationalized oil versus
the any kind of aiding the CIA in drug trafficking.
Karen and Ashley, I'm sure you two are big Tupac fans. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I don't know. What questions do you have?
That not so much. I mean, I do. It's complete. It's fascinating, interesting. I know who he is, and I know the controversy around him. And I know people who wear Thug Life T-shirts and that type of thing. So it's definitely culturally relevant. I really enjoyed in your documentary learning about that, and it ties in so well. Somebody in the chat was asking, why are we talking about Tupac? And I said, because he was also the CIA. It's tied in like with the Laurel Canyon scene or the anti-war. You have to squash anybody who is not with the program, anybody who's going to possibly put a dent into the drug sales or cause dissent about the war, which for Vietnam, it was about drugs there too, of course. And then that was the beef we had with the Taliban in Afghanistan, was that they were got rid of the opium poppies there, more or less. And so I just think it's interesting with the Tupac thing. And then I wonder and how throughout history, and then even with Central and South America, the way that like Operation Condor and other ways that anybody with any dissent or any heart for the people, movement for the people, has to be stepped on. And this is, we see the same factions, the same people over and over and over again. The CIA very much tied in with Operation Paperclip and MK Ultra and the money laundering and the whole Epstein thing. And that's here, that's in Central America, South America, all of this history. It's the same players and the same threads and the same modes of operation over and over and over again. And I was going to ask you two things. Number one, is Tupac's stepfather still incarcerated?
He was just let go within the past year when he was dying of cancer, and he died maybe 8 months later. He died about 12 months ago.
My goodness.
Yeah. Okay. And this was, he was incarcerated for all that time, even past his parole. His parole was, he was supposed to be paroled at a certain point. They wouldn't allow him on parole. And he was framed in the first place. And he used acupuncture to stop drug addiction, to basically detox people off of heroin and cocaine in a really fast way with oracular acupuncture, needles that relate to the nerves that go through to the vital organs that can detox you much faster. I got trained in that at Lincoln Detox, where a place he helped open up for that purpose. And but he was in jail by the time, of course, I got there. Nonetheless, yeah. So this was about, so all the people, the activists and musicians I talk about in my book and film, Drugs as a Weapon Against Us, they all shared the same values. They were anti-war. They started off, sadly, or at some points in their lives, a lot of them, incidentally got involved in drugs, but then were manipulated to get involved in drugs. Yeah, I think people did manipulate Tupac to start smoking weed, knowing his mother developed she was manipulated. She was infiltrated by a intelligence agent named Lake Saunders, who worked with Nicky Barnes, who worked with some CIA trafficking operation in New York City. And I show the evidence why he was, again, part of U.S. intelligence. But they, all these people were manipulated to inadvertently promote drugs. And as soon as they sobered up and started getting more serious about their activism, they were done away with. And now, people like Mick Jagger there was attempts on his life, but they killed Brian Jones, the real founder of the Rolling Stones. And, of course, John Lennon, Jimi Hendrix, and Kurt Cobain were, again, they were all manipulated to promote drugs. When they started sobering up and getting more into activism, they were done away with. With Jimi Hendrix, he wanted to team up with Bob Dylan, to talk to him about starting, a anti-war movement. Janis Joplin too. She had started these unprecedented. Said she was going to be the star attraction at these unprecedented stadium concerts for peace. And she announced that on the Dick Cavett show, and then she got a hot shot before she could actually do those two shows, one in New York, one in Shea Stadium, and one in Philadelphia at their baseball stadium. So this is the kind of stuff that went on. This was the pattern. And I show all the evidence of these intelligence people in all their lives, admitted, some admitted, with Jimi Hendrix, his manager was admitted former MI6, which is CIA agent and stuff. So this is just the way it worked. And I show how they were used, in different numbers of agents that were also, of course, attacked the Black Panthers and attacked the largest anti-war movement in the country, the Students for Democratic Society, during the Vietnam War. And so this is, now in Chile during the Salvador Allende era in the 1970s, when he was a doctor who was the first president, that was really democratically elected to be president of Chile in I believe it was about 1970 or so, and they toppled him around in the a few years later. They first, while toppling him, they made sure to kill the most popular folk singer, Victor Jara, in Chile, because they knew that these musicians had the hearts and minds of the people, which the CIA and other U.S. intelligence groups hope to, control. They know they can't control the masses with force, so they have to control their hearts and minds, and with manipulation. And that's why the musicians are so dangerous, because they capture our hearts and minds, especially the hearts and minds of young people, who are, probably the lead people that would be the protesters and the soldiers and everything else, and the revolutionaries.
That's why I think there's a song, Tom Paxton did a song about Allende. I don't know if you've ever heard that song.
Yeah, I think I have heard.
The white bones of Allende and the scattered bones of Chile. They're your Peace Prize, Dr. K. I was listening to that song last night after I watched your documentary. I went to UC Santa Cruz. I was too young to be a hippie, but not too long after. So I really, I had my own little issues with drugs and during my college years, and I was able to step away from that. But I do have some experience from which to draw. And I really respect what you do as an addiction counselor. And I've looked into that a lot. And I was going to ask if you did train with the acupuncture, which you said you have. I was wondering also about how so many people that seem to be the counterculture, or that the COINTELPRO goes after the CIA, et cetera, seem to be more on the left, or even labeled as communists, the red threat. You had so many people that that we're seeing people being labeled as narco-terrorists and other things like that, anti-Semites. So I'm wondering if you feel that there was a campaign, I know in South America, Central America, to call people communists, reds, all that type of thing, that perhaps they wouldn't fit that label, like Che Guevara, for example.
And that's what these kind of media brainwashing operations try to do, is they try to label everything and categorize everything, but they try to say anyone slightly left of hyper-capitalist is a communist, and anyone who just is anti-war is a communist. And so if you put them in that communist category, they're easier to dispose of. It's easier to brainwash the people that are pro-war, or the people that are scared of the communists to kill them, or to carry out some kind of manipulative operation against them. And so you can convince your foot soldiers more easily when you call them all communists, as if that's the boogeyman. When obviously the Maduro regime and the Chavez regime was a leftist socialist type of regime, and they formed cooperatives. They took like Chavez took what was 800 cooperatives in Venezuela and turned them to 80,000 cooperatives, is what I read. So these were cooperatives in communities that had real democratic voting on everything. And they could then take that vote and send that message to the government saying, we voted on it, and here's what we decided. Well, we'd like these projects to be reviewed for funding, out of however many were proposed by different individuals in their communities. And it's just, they voted on things, they had cooperatives for so many different parts of society. And it was like such a unique democratic socialist model that is, as much as I like the idea of Bernie Sanders saying free, colleges and stuff and free healthcare, I'm for that too. He's nothing. He hasn't come anywhere close to the kind of democratic socialism that was in Venezuela, under Chavez and Maduro.
Ashley, what are your thoughts on all this?
So I have to say that I am not as well versed in Tupac as certainly the chat. We know Twisted.
Yeah, there's a lot of experts
You know
there.
anything about Kurt Cobain or any other of the musicians?
Yeah, so I am more familiar with that, and I was in middle school when Kurt Cobain died, and then this is something that I'm wondering. A couple of years ago, maybe I heard you on Higher Side Chats discussing the Courtney Love. So maybe we can touch base on that. But the issue, okay, a couple things that I wanted to say in regards to Vietnam. I do see that as foundational for what we're seeing now, because not only because of the drug running and the figuring out of like the drug lines and getting that into the United States, but as well as establishing the technocracy, particularly with the Phoenix program and the very thorough identification of the people that they perceive to be as an enemy or potentially helping the Viet Cong. And then also, once again, Ho Chi Minh is another example of a leader that was also trained by and had worked with the CIA before the United States was officially at war with Vietnam. And really the war on us, as you talk about the drugs being used as weapons against us, I was curious. So it's something that I have thought about, that essentially that this was a continuation of the the British East India Company and the Opium Wars in China, and that they had recognized that this was such a powerful way to dilute the power of the regular person and to interrupt communities. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, and then just to tie it back in a little bit with your experience in treating addiction. And what I was saying earlier is that we have so many people that have unfortunately fallen prey to this. So what are your thoughts on coming back from that?
Well, so I'll try to touch on a few things you touched on. The Opium Wars in China, yeah, they basically the British East India Company and the American oligarch families that were tied into the British East India Company, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant families that were you can some of them are the Pierponts of John Pierpont Morgan fame. Some of them were the Russells, who started Yale University, and the trust, the Russell Trust, at Yale was funded the secret society at Yale. I just forgot their name all of a sudden, but
Skull and Bones.
What's that?
The Skull and Bones.
Yeah, Skull and Bones, right? Thank you. And so they all had all those Ivy League colleges were started with these families that were involved in opium shipping. Lowe's, I went to at Columbia, they had the Lowe Library. It was the Lowe family were opium shippers with the British East India Company. The Greens at Princeton, and James Bradley, who wrote books that were made into Clint Eastwood movie, Flags of Our Fathers, talked about this. He wrote a book about opium shippers and how they were behind a lot of like the Delanos, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt fame. Delanos were opium shippers. It was the Abbotts and the Cabots, and the Pierponts at Harvard, and different other opium shippers, the Greens at Princeton, etc. Anyway, they kind of set the pace early on and were shipping all this opium into China. China's emperor basically saw what it was doing to the populace and saw that they were in his populace was in a stupor and got scared of how even the military was in a stupor from all this opium coming into their country. And so they tried to ban the opium, and that started these two opium wars. And because so much of this country was in a stupor already from the opium, they couldn't fight well. But the British also used that same opium to put its workers, any of like potential revolutionary forces in its country in a bit of a stupor. Like they especially targeted certain groups of activists for the opium, and that got those activist communities in that opium stupor, so that they couldn't, do as much against for fighting for rights for the labor movement of that during the industrial area and 1800s, like late 1800s and all in Britain. And that's how it was used. Now, the American oligarchs did the same thing in the United States. They used that opium to target particularly women in a big way, to keep them fighting, from fighting for the right to vote. They used it against minority communities to keep them from fighting for their rights, such as the Black community and all. And then they started using cocaine the same way. And cocaine became popularized with Coca-Cola. It was actually real cocaine in Coca-Cola, was an addictive amount, and that was spread through wealthy Southern family throughout the country. And so, when you look at like the Wizard of Oz, that's about opium addiction. The flying monkeys is about opium addiction with their, being stuff like that, because it was really becoming a problem with these wealthiest, families were behind a lot of that opium shipping. And so Pierpont became John Pierpont Morgan. John Pierpont Morgan, coupled with the Rockefellers, Manhattan Chase Bank to form J.P. Morgan Chase, the biggest bank in the world. And everyone's talking about the Zionists and Jews and all that, but it's to take your eye off of the wealthiest white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who really were behind a lot of this. But nonetheless, the key aspect of it all is, yes, they use these drugs to sedate, divide, and oppress the masses as needed, including in a targeted way when they target it more. Like Gary Webb said, they were targeting it into the Black communities with these drugs, into the communities of color. And when they wanted to target, any white uprising, they used John Lennon to target the activist community of, against that were protesting the Vietnam War. And they manipulated him, and they got people around him to convince him first to take more acid, even though he thought he was losing his mind. For a year and a half, he got away from the acid, and then they had people close to him convince him to get back into it. And in my sequel to Drugs as Weapons Against This Film, my film CIA Drugs Are Us, I show the evidence that Yoko Ono was parallel to Courtney Love as a U.S. intelligence asset to convince John Lennon to get back into taking acid, even though he thought he was losing his mind. When he got back into it, he would throw up for hours before concerts, so he couldn't even do any more concerts. And they had a publicist. His publicist was also pushing the acid on him like crazy. The guy who I show was connected to major, focus bands of Dave McGowan, who did great work at showing these front bands for CIA operations. And so then with Yoko Ono, her father basically told me directly that he got a letter from a U.S. intelligence guy who said he wasn't the letter said he wasn't a spy per se, but he had to visit the U.S. embassy weekly and give reports on Irish uprisings in Ireland when Hank Harrison was doing, Courtney Love's biological father was doing research in Ireland. And so here's Courtney Love visiting. She just turned 17 years old. And here was this guy starting to befriend Courtney Love, was having sex with her. He's in his mid to late 20s, and she's 17 years old. He brings her, she's got 1,000 hits of acid, really strong, extra strong acid on her. And he helps bring her to the British music scene in Liverpool and starts distributing it like candy, along with other drugs, opiates, pain pills, and other things to musicians throughout that scene, until she, and she repeats the same thing throughout activist music scenes throughout the United States. She does it in Portland. She does it in Los Angeles. She marries the top punk musician in Los Angeles, Courtney Love does, and he thinks he's marrying this this punk leftist woman, and it turns out she's like a right-wing Phyllis Diller, he says. and he was like scared to death of her, because she threatened to hire thugs to beat him up if he doesn't do everything she says, and she carried that threat out. Who's got like mafia on hand at all times to carry out beatings for you, when you're just supposedly this rising this like whatever, the starving artist punk musician of some sort. And so then he gets away from her, and then she goes to Seattle scene and starts distributing drugs like crazy, nearly kills certain other musicians with extra strong heroin, and then latches on to Kurt Cobain. And Kurt Cobain was a very anti-war, very anti-racism, very anti-materialist, very anti-capitalist. That was his politics. And but he was also incredibly bright and creative. And when his first album, Nevermind, started rising up the charts like crazy, all of a sudden Courtney Love comes into his life, gets pregnant with his kid. He does the right thing and marries her, but he makes her sign a prenuptial agreement, and then and then she gets involved in the solicitation of his murder. According to Eldon Hoke, musician Eldon Hoke, who said on film and tape. And when he said it for Nick Broomfield on film, within several days of saying it on film for Nick Broomfield, documentary filmmaker, probably the most awarded documentary filmmaker in Britain, Eldon Hoke dies.
Very strangely.
Yeah. And so this is the pattern, and all these musicians had different levels of their politics, but they all were overlapped with their politics: anti-war, anti-racism, and they all got done away with for when they threatened to promote sobriety, and when they threatened to get more serious about their activism.
Right, absolutely. And what do you, we talked about Dave McGowan, who's the book Weird Seeds Inside the Canyon, is kind of a companion piece to yours. Did his book come out before yours, or which came out first?
It came out a year before mine, and so I was just emailing back and forth with him about publishers and stuff, and he wasn't happy with his publisher, but I think his publisher did a good job. No one's happy with the publisher, right? Yeah, sure. But he was upbeat at the time. He just was a little worried about, because he had put out this message that someone said to him, basically that someone said to him, someone who smokes like you may just find themselves all of a sudden with stage 4 cancer.
Yes.
And then he did, and it sounded like a warning to him. He was, worried about that.
Very rapid fire cancer, Jack Ruby style. He was galloping.
I talked to Dave's brother, Craig McGowan.
Yes.
And what they did is they inserted a woman into Dave had been divorced, and they inserted a woman into his life, who then tried to kill Craig and poisoned Craig, and Craig got very sick, but didn't die, because he realized that he actually fed part of his meal that she was feeding him to the dog, and the dog got really sick really fast, and he was like, oh my God, he had taken a nibble of it, but the dog got really sick really fast, and so he just luckily was just hurt but not killed by it. And it's just ugly stuff what they the way they had sadly probably killed Gary Webb, attacked a number of people that write about the kind of stuff that, sadly enough, we write about, so.
Oh, it's scary stuff. And if you would, Karen mentioned it in the chat about the John B. Wells interview. I've been on John B. Wells' show a couple times in the past.
It was a Boston bombing episode, epic, like 3 or 4 hour episode.
Yes.
And then
Brilliant.
Very spooky. And he's smoking so much, he is coughing.
Yeah.
And it's, it was, I think, probably the last interview he ever gave. One of the few video interviews, but it's spooky because it was not long after that they sent the message that there was no hope. So I don't, how that happened, I don't know. But and he died, and then he dies on November 22nd, which
Right.
I
Yeah.
felt
And
that
Dave
cosmic
was,
coincidence.
yeah, I was gonna say Dave was, a valid democratic socialist, and I was just hovering around that term, but I really he kind of convinced me just to say it more, But it doesn't even matter what you are, whether you're on the right wing, left wing. It's all up in the air. Who knows what it all means? The issues are the most important thing. Each little issue is most important, and that's why when people demonize RFK Jr., it's just sad because it's just an issue. It's not a
Yeah.
stance. He's not all one thing. He's about trying to save us from certain poisons that are entering our bodies. That's all.
I'm one of his last fanboys. I mean, I'm a Kennedy fanboy, and I don't know. People hate him. So many people hate him in the alt media. It's like, look, he can do what he can do. Look how hard it's been for he you get the hepatitis B vaccine taken off as being required for infants. I
It's
mean, that was
unbelievable.
stupid and ridiculous to begin
Right
with, but
out the
that's
womb, you're given a hepatitis shot. It's so
I mean,
absurd. And hepatitis is you get from injecting drugs and having sex. Like that little infant, is gonna get into drugs
Twisted
and
Pistol is
sex right
going back
away.
and forth with me in the chat. First of all, I don't know that Tupac was gay. I'm just saying he appeared effeminate in that interview. I don't know. I know nothing about it, and I don't think Whitlock thinks Tupac was really bad. He just showed the interview, and Whitlock, as I do, I tend to think a lot of these people. If you saw what was the comedian? God, I've forgotten him already. He had a huge interview with Shannon Sharp of all people. What's that guy's name? You
Cat
probably know.
Williams. Cat
Cat
Williams.
Cat
Yeah,
Williams,
yeah,
who really interesting interview where he talked about people being installed, especially black entertainers.
right,
I
right,
buy that theory. I think they find these people and they install them. And
yeah,
because sometimes there's no other explanation. So when I saw that interview with him, I I thought, well, this guy's obviously a great actor. And this was the role he was assigned to play. But I mean, I understand, I don't know that, but I'm
yeah.
no and Billy Ray says Whitlock top level defense. Billy Ray says RFK Jr.'s done nothing. Billy Whitlock top level dumbass. The John B. Wells top level disinformation.
Yeah, so Reggie Wright Jr. I did an interview like with him, and it was sad to hear him say that. But the guy that was friends
Yeah.
with him that set up the interview said before he died, he said that he really does agree with what you're saying. But Reggie Wright Jr. No, not Reggie Wright Jr. Reggie Wright Jr. basically was part of the U.S. intelligence, is what it was. He got the name wrong. It's not Reggie Wright Jr. I did an interview with. I did an interview with Frank Alexander, with a guy named Asher Underwood, and Asher was friends with Frank Alexander. And so Reggie Wright Jr. is his father's Reggie Wright Sr. was head of Compton Police Gang Division. And Compton was one of the first places that called a peace truce between the gangs of the Bloods and the Crips. And so here his father's head of the gang division that targeted the Bloods and Crips leaders that called that peace truce. And then here's his son working for the Los Angeles Police Department, who then becomes head of Death Row Record Security, that is in charge of dozens and dozens of LA police officers moonlighting as death row security officers. And the lead investigator on that, a guy named Russell Poole, who was a highly decorated police detective, says that when I found my fellow police officers at all levels of death row records, I asked my superiors, what are they doing there? And they told me you can call them troubleshooters or covert agents. Was the superiors, what they said about that. So he couldn't, he came out in public with that, and they canned him. They just, they just fired him, did away with him. They tried to squash everything he said. There was 3 films that were attempted to be made on what Russell Poole said in his big investigation of death row records, which as a basically intelligence, it was basically, turns out it was an intelligence front company that was trafficking drugs, trafficking guns, and trying to stop Tupac's, peace truce movement. And so they killed Tupac, and the peace movement ended for about a week while Tupac was lying, trying to survive in the hospital. When Tupac died, activists convinced the Bloods and Crips that no, we don't think it was, any of the Crips that killed Tupac. We think it was someone else, and possibly U.S. intelligence. And they got the Bloods and Crips to call peace truce again throughout L.A. And that's the way that worked. But nonetheless, people, Greg Kading's a disinformation agent, put in place to, someone asked, to counter what Russell Poole came out with as the first real investigator of what happened between the Blood, with Tupac and Biggie's murders. And so Detective Russell Poole was in a meeting. Someone close with Russell Poole told me that there was a meeting where he was bringing in the best evidence of who really shot Tupac, who pulled the trigger, and he brought it to a county sheriff, LA County Sheriff's office. And in that meeting was Reggie Wright Jr. And they used a defibrillator to shock his heart to death. In that meeting is what he told me, according to eyewitnesses in that big meeting. And it's really sad for his family. Just communicated with his son, and it's just very sad. But they tried to do 3 Hollywood motion pictures of Russell Poole, with Leonardo DiCaprio starring in one, with DreamWorks trying to produce it. It was squashed by the LA Police Department. Sylvester Stallone tried to do one, make a movie playing Russell Poole. It was squashed by the LA Police Department. And finally, what's his name? Pirates of the Caribbean guy.
Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp played Russell Poole in a film that came out during COVID, so no one saw it. But that finally came out, but they knew they'd only allow it out if it was completely censored. And, it came out during COVID, so no one could see it. But it just elevated Russell Poole. It discredited Greg Kading. And it showed that Russell Poole's investigation, showing that what he said was his fellow police officers killed rapper Biggie Smalls, to cover up their murder of Tupac Shakur. And that's what Russell Poole came out with. He didn't know why, but that's basically it. Yeah. Go on. Yeah, Ashley.
So in the same vein of music, I have a friend who was asking about your thoughts on Chester Bennington and Chris Cornell. We know that we lost them in 2017, very close together. And there was a lot of people that were discussing the fact that they thought they were killed because of their work against child trafficking, and then some other, strange connections. So what are your thoughts on that?
Victims of child molestation and possible trafficking. They helped finance, good activist groups, and like Anne Hesh, starring in a film about all that. They all 3 died around, close to the same time. Anne Hesh can be seen like rising up off of a gurney and pushed back down, and then is dead. And her car got controlled remotely and sent into someone's house. So bizarre, and that was after she starred in this film that was covering child trafficking. They were doing great work against child trafficking, and it's so ridiculous that they died by some autoerotic asphyxiation or some bullshit they said, like Robin Williams did, but whatever it was, yeah.
On that note, along those,
how exactly they died, but the best evidence I had found was that, I think it wasn't a coincidence. That's all I can say about that. But I didn't write about it, so I can't go into detail anymore.
Okay, yeah, because I was curious if you had thought that there was this the cryptocracy connection to taking these guys out, and I believe for sure with Chris Cornell, I remember hearing that potentially his sobriety had been breached, but I don't remember the method of him passing. And I'm not 100% sure with Chester either. I don't remember that, but I did want to get your thoughts and see if you did actually think that all of that was connected based on, your research into other areas.
I was going to ask, what did you think about Dennis Quaid talking about the star whackers?
Randy Quaid. Yeah, I was going to ask the same thing.
Randy Quaid, the star whackers.
I like his theory.
Yeah, I don't know about his theory, but yes, I mean, obviously, the stars that reach us in alternative ways, because people aren't as interested in politicians because they're so corrupt. That we idolize and look up to, and the stars and musicians the most, but some actors too, obviously. And when actors get too against the CIA agenda, yeah, they do seem to be murdered or done away with or die in mysterious circumstances or things like that. Yeah, I can agree with that idea. Do you think so too, Don?
Do you see the question for you on screen? We're almost out of time here. Greg
Yeah,
Keating. Who's Greg
addressed
Keating?
that. Yeah, I already addressed that. Greg Kading, who's a disinformation agent. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. I'm sorry, I missed that. But and we're rolling down here. We're pretty much out of time. But I want to give everybody, John, any closing thoughts or anything you want to promote?
Yeah, well, I just want to say that. So, yeah, I went into, with Drugs as Weapons Against Us and book and film and the sequel, CIA Drugs Are Us. I just tried to go into the history of the use of drugs, of course, as weapons. But I also wanted to go into the history of MK Ultra. And I've been studying that for decades, since at least about 1990. And now as a trauma specialist, that's what I do as a psychotherapist now, is work with trauma with a technique called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I help people with various traumas, and I find that I work with victims of Father Maskell. If you saw the Emmy award-winning or nominated series, The Keepers, on Netflix, it talks about the victims of Father Maskell, and I've treated some of them, and I've talked to Gemma Hoskins at length, and she worked with me on fourth CIA Drugs Are Us to expose the MK Ultra connections between the Maskell and MK Ultra and the church and MK Ultra, and turns out chaplains of all sorts were trained by MK Ultra to do what they did: use drugs, hypnosis, and trauma against people to turn them into dissociative identity agents, sadly enough. And so some of them come out in my film to reveal some of this, and that's another aspect of it, of all this insanity. But something I felt like I had to expose. But I hope that we can stop the war on Venezuela and stop the war on Greenland before it happens, and stop the war on all these other places that we are constantly at war with, sadly enough.
So where can people still get your book, I'm assuming, and where can they watch your film?
Yeah, I mean, my book, a book has been in Barnes and Noble, though it's more people probably order it on Amazon or other places, or you can get it at some independent booksellers. CIA Drugs Are Us and Drugs as Weapons Against Us films are available for free on Tubi. But they're also, you can get them without ads in certain places too. And johnpotash.com shows you, all the places you can see and get these films and all that, and read the books, my books.
Very cool. Karen Carpenter, any links or anything? Closing thoughts?
Ashley and I are on Knights of the Storm on Rumble and X Saturdays at 11 Pacific and 2 o'clock Eastern. Tomorrow we have Renee, is it Devereaux, who is also a counselor and healer through many modalities.
Yes, Devereaux,
right. And it was great to meet you, John. I've seen your interviews before. I've been around a while in this, this neck of the woods. And so it's great to meet you. And I'm really glad I took the time to rent your documentaries. I rented them on YouTube.
Great.
So they're great, and I highly recommend them. Check out John's work. And thank you, Don. It was great. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
R.B. Ham, who my friend from Canada, very courageous trucker up there, that part of the convoy, who I think the Canadian government fined him $50,000 or something. He lost his job. I mean, so help him out if you can. He's on. I want to show almost every Saturday night. It seems at 8 o'clock Eastern. Be on there tomorrow, and we're talking about the same kind of stuff. It's his Rumble channel is Beyond the Pale, R.B. Ham. So be sure to tune in for that. Somebody asked me a question. Where can we find? Yeah, he just said you can get it on Tubi for free, and I guess other places. So look it up on there. Ashley, any closing thoughts? Anything you want to promote?
Well, Karen said it. Our Knights of the Storm. People can find me over on X at think_change_2. And if anyone wants to reach out, you can email me thinkchangerepeat at email or at gmail.com. And yes, to reiterate what Karen said, so happy to be here with both of you, all three of you today, Karen. And I really appreciate the opportunity so much. It's been a wonderful conversation and amazing experience. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Don. Appreciate it. And thanks, Karen, especially.
Appreciate it, John. I love having, you know, I come from the left. I was a member of the ACLU at one point back in the dark ages, and civil libertarian, but I consort mostly with far right-wing extremists now because the left is really boring and controlling, except for Cindy Sheehan and a couple other people. So it's nice to meet somebody where my heart is, because I'm classical liberal. You wouldn't know it from talking. That's where I truly am. So thanks so much for coming on. Thanks everybody in the chat. It was nice getting
Thanks
this
so much,
kind of
Don.
involvement. So again, we'll listen to me tomorrow night. Look for me on the RB Ham's Beyond the Pale channel, 8 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Take care, everyone. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for John. Thanks, John, Ashley, Karen. Thanks for being here. See you next week on I Protest.